All right, let's do some thought bleeding. After creating the video about symptoms and disease, which I was not necessarily very happy with, I was thinking about the subject more. I was creating a different video. I was creating some diagrams, and I realized that this is a perfect subject for me to really try out my intuitive thinking, improvisation, thought bleeding setup that I think I mostly enjoy. And I hope that it's something other people can enjoy as well. And so I figured, let's just try this thing out and talk about, I would say, mental models, the way the brain works. I'm not really sure what exactly I am looking at. It's something I'm still thinking about. And instead of just arriving at some conclusion and recording some sort of insight for you, I think it's much more interesting. I hope it's much more interesting to actually take you through what I'm looking at, what I'm thinking about, so that it could inspire you both on the part of what I'm talking about, the content, but also about the process. Because I think in this world we have too much focus on the outcome of things, on the output of people, and not enough appreciation for the process or the messiness of the whole thing. And, you know, I've been guilty of doing this as well. I remember when I started my YouTube and I actually had some subscribers and people watching my videos, that it actually started influencing me that I wanted to make interesting movies that made great points and that showcased my perspectives or my intelligence or my insights. I'm not sure what, but I became someone who was curating a lot more than I would do for myself, right? I know very little. I know I'm good at thinking and processing, but not necessarily very structured or very good in creating some sort of narrative. Now, if I need to do this for, let's say, my job, I can do it. It's a painful process, and maybe I should do it for this type of content as well. But, you know, I think the process of coming to the outcome can be interesting just as much as the outcome, maybe even more, especially in a world where we emphasize the process and we overemphasize the outcome. You have this with success and with money a lot as well. It doesn't really matter how you got your success or money. We just put you on a pedestal if you have success and money, and think or project that means you know how to do this, and we all listen to you because, right, you have the house, the car, and the happiness, so you must know how, right? We don't look at serendipity, luck, co-creation, right? I had this strong feeling after watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie, that, you know, a master in his craft is really playing with the universe. He is playing with his knowledge, his experience. He's improvising, and the universe is flowing along with that. And if you are open to being helped, then you will be helped. And this, for me, has to do with thinking a lot, right? I don't believe that you can think yourself. I think thinking happens to you. And what you do is curate the thoughts. You pay attention and you jump on, or you zoom in, or you focus on the ideas that pop up that you think are interesting. And this has made me realize that, at least for me, I don't know how it works for the rest of the world, but I'm an intuitive thinker, meaning there's first the intuition and then the logic, right? I think we, as people, really desire to be logical and to be, you know, valid. And I think we use arguments and logic to pretend that we are valid, because why did you do this? Well, because of this reason. Isn't this logical? Then why I did it makes total sense. But I think we first do the thing and then we rationalize or justify afterward. And I think this is also the case when it comes to having ideas, right? I think if I look at how I think, and I have a video about this that I created a while back. I'll see if I can find it and post it. But I would say that the inside first feels correct, and then you try to explain to yourself why it is correct. So what happens is you're thinking, and then you have this idea or this flash or this insight, whatever you want to call it, and instantly you realize this is the correct insight. I'm onto something here. And then you start looking at it and explaining it to yourself and rationalizing to yourself why this is actually a valid insight. So you could say that your thinking is biased once you think you have a good idea, and then you start explaining, validating, justifying why it is a good idea. I think this is how thinking works for everyone. I know it's how it works for me, and I think I was hesitant in the past to be honest about that, because that would make me not smart. It would just make me someone who had, a lot of ideas that came to him, and then he selected one and said, let me create a logical narrative structure around it, and then look at me being smart. But I think it is what it is. And I think it's important that that gets shared as well. And that's why I arrived at the whole thought bleeding thing, because I'm not smart. I just have a lot of thoughts. I think aloud, either by myself or with other people. If anything, I'm interested and curious to come to new insights, to find new connections, to understand that which cannot be understood, which is everything. But I always try. And in that striving of understanding, I reach insights and outcomes that, are sometimes interesting or useful. And that's what I have to offer. It's what I do by myself, for myself. It's my hobby, it's my destiny, it's my life. And that's what I'm going to share. So this also means, by the way, that when I'm thinking about stuff, I'm always thinking about the same things, because I always end up at the same things. I'm always ending up at, what does it mean to be a human being? What is awareness, and where does it come from, and how does it work? And whatever I see, I always bring back to the same idea, really. So if I'm just creating movies with conclusions, they're going to be always the same kind of conclusions. If I make movies about how did I get there, then perhaps slowly but surely I can kind of give you my frameworks, my mental models, not for you to copy, but for you to take a look at, for you to be inspired by, for you to, I don't know, you figure it out. You let me know what you think about it. So for now, what I would like to do is to take a look at really the process of this fallacy, or whatever you want to call it, where I think people tend to focus on outcomes, tend to focus on results, and not on the underlying or causal nature behind the outcome. And as I was thinking about this, I created some graphics, visuals, whatever you want to call it. I will share those in a moment. But for me, it's obvious that we have not taught ourselves, we have not taught our children to really understand what they are, this awareness thing that can think and that can rationalize. And we have certainly not taught them how to think. And what we did teach them is that they should remember the thoughts of their ancestors, right? When you look at school, a big part of school, at least when I was in school, and I still feel that is the case, has to do with remembering other people's conclusions. And this always reminds me of What's the Meaning of Life 42, right? The Hitchhiker's Galaxy, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the joke is that someone asks, what's the meaning of life? And the answer is, it's 42, right? And this is exactly the way he makes fun of the way the world works, right? We ask existential questions, but we don't care about doing the work, going through the process. We think there is an outcome that is important, when the meaning of life can be found in finding the meaning of life, never to arrive at something that has value. And if it has value, it certainly does not have value for someone else, because life is about doing the math and not the outcome. And I think that captures the essence of my conclusion or perspective on this whole thing. It's about doing the math, not the outcome. Thinking is about processing, not remembering. However, when you look at school, when you look at work, what you often get presented is outcomes of lists that have been created by people with authority. So I'm just going to make up an example here, but let's say you're studying psychology. Right? What they will present you with is, well, to understand human psychology, you need to understand that there's 3 modes of thinking. There's abstract thinking, there's practical thinking, and there's improvisation thinking. I'm just making this up. But, right? And then you need to remember this. Well, this is how it is. There's 3, but it makes no sense, right? It doesn't give you anything. It just tells you, like, someone thought about this, and they, in one way or the other, arrived at this list. And now they present it to you like it's a complete list. There's only 3 modes of thinking, and whatever you think, it should fit in this little list of 3 modes. And now we're going to talk the whole book about this, that, and the other mode, and then we're going to relate whatever we come up with or we say to these modes. So you're kind of stuck in this narrow list that someone outside of you has come up with, and you're just going to have to deal with that list and accept it as reality. And so you go home and you need to study for your exam. So you start thinking, okay, what are the 3 modes of thinking again, right? Which I think is ridiculous. There is nothing there but dead structure, right? I always think for myself that what the artist creates is a turd, right? It's just, he went through his process, he consumed ideas, he processed those ideas, and he comes up with a turd. He goes to the bathroom, and this is the result of his work. And so the turd, although it could be pretty, and you can project all kinds of ideas on it, what is really interesting to me is the process. What did he consume? What did he think about what he consumed? How did he process? Right? I remember being into documentaries a long time ago and watching a lot of documentaries, and finally looking for documentaries about how did they make the documentary, right? Just as the documentary itself is interesting, I am very interested in someone filming how they made the documentary. And I think that is that's something that's at play here as well. So in school, we are not taught to think or rationalize or to look behind the curtain, so to say. We get taught that there's outside authority, and the authority has the list with the answers, and we have to remember the answers. And in this way, I hate to say it, but we kind of retard the culture, right? We hold each other back because we really use our youngsters to validate ourselves, right? If they accept the ideas, they start using it, then look, you can point to this or that person and say, oh, what a genius that person was. He was the one who came up with this idea or that idea, right? I remember that I made videos in the past, and if I would publish them and share them on Reddit, people would react saying, well, this idea that you posed, it's just this or that philosopher. He already thought about it, or he already thought that up, right? You're just using your own words to explain his idea. And at the same time, I've never heard about that person, or I never read that material. And so I started to realize that I'm like living in my own world, thinking about stuff, and I come up with stuff that seems totally logical and makes sense, and I'm happy with it, and I'm sharing this idea. And then people say, well, no, that's not your idea. It's some guy who lived 200 years ago's idea. And, there's no validity in what you're saying or something. And this is a nice example of how we externalize authority And we misunderstand what the value or process of having insights is, right? I used to say in the videos a couple of years ago, whatever I say, it's just inspiration for you to take, break, and remake. And I still stand behind that, right? There is no value in my insight for you. The only insights worth having are the insights inside of you. And whatever someone else is saying could just be seen as entertainment or inspiration. And it's something you consume, and from that consumption you process, and from that process you produce. And whether or not you share that product that comes out, on internet or with someone else, it doesn't matter. It's just the way things work. And I think it is very important that you start paying attention to this process for yourself, and that you realize that it's not about knowing objective ideas that are out there about how the world works or how you work. All outside insights and information are there to help you come to your own conclusion about what it is that you are, what it is that you think is real, how things work. That is the right. Mental models are only useful if you build them yourself. And it's really the only thing you can do. Your brain is always creating mental models. Structure, process, trying to capture reality and truth in a fixed thing, which is impossible because it's a fluid, flowy, one thing completely, and your mind is really good at separating and chopping things up and judging and building structure. And this isn't the truth, it's a model, but it's useful. And so understanding that you make mental models and that all models only are valuable if they are your own models, and really getting a grip on how this works, I think that is interesting. So that's where I want to go right now and talk about how does this work? And the point behind this whole thing really is that you should never just accept outcomes. You should really start focusing on the underlying math. And the brain, if you ask me, is a processor way more than it's a hard drive. So memory is a part of what your brain can do, but it's not its primal function. I think it uses memory in order to process. Really, the memory is more like RAM than it's like a hard drive, if you understand what I mean, right? RAM, short-term memory, can be accessed really quick, while storage memory, the hard drive, it has a lot of capacity, but it's a lot slower in retrieving. I think your memories of your life maybe go to the hard drive storage, but I think your ideas about how reality works are really more short-term, floating around. Although, and I think that's also in line with how the brain works biologically, ideas can get enforced, right? The way I see it is that when you experience the world, you get impressed. So you see things, you experience things, and the more you get exposed to something, or the intenser you get exposed to something through emotion, this leaves a more lasting impression. And to me, in my idea, that is the flash that leaves residue. So you get impressed by an impression, and that impression leaves residue. And then as you continue being exposed to that same sort of impression, or if you get exposed in a very intense way, it leaves more residue. And that residue is used by your brain, so to say, to build mental models, to build structures, to build a process, to build your understanding of the world. And that model is then always compared to what is happening in reality. And as long as it's pretty accurate, the model will survive and actually be enforced. And if there's dissonance, if there's cognitive dissonance, if the model bumps up to something that disputes it in such a way that you can no longer maintain the model, then you have a crisis. You have a moment of cognitive dissonance where you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? and then maybe you change your model, or maybe you look at a different model to ignore the dissonance, or maybe you start justifying yourself and explaining why reality is actually not correct here, or why this happened to you and it was just a one-time thing, right? We do this with our image of ourselves. We do this with our image of how the world works, right? If you have this idea about how the world works for 10, 20 years, and some person or some event brushes up and shows you that the model's actually not correct, then that's a crisis. And most people, most of the time, just figure out a way to have their model survive, and they ignore, or they, change in their mind what actually happened. So I think you should really focus on understanding the underlying mental models and perspectives that give birth to outcomes. And when it comes to thinking of stuff yourself, this is where you should be looking. You should really not just think in lists, but you should think in frameworks, and you should think in perspective or context or vision. So I'm going to try and switch this video into showing you this. It's just something I drew up really quickly to kind of give you an idea about how I think you work and how I work and what I think. The whole idea being, if I want to relay this to the symptoms and the disease, is that if you understand the underlying disease, if you understand the underlying cause or framework that's at play, then you can derive the symptoms, you can derive the conclusion. You don't want people in math to remember every answer to every possible question. You want to give them the tools to understand how the logic works, so that you can throw any question at them, and they will arrive at the answer themselves. This is exactly what it should be in every subject, right? Except geography, because we came up with names for countries and cities and rivers and all these things that make absolutely no sense. And I always hated geography because there was no logic for me to hang this stuff on, right? Because I think when I was young, this is what differentiated me from a lot of other kids. I'm always thinking about the process, and I don't want to remember stuff. I want to see stuff and oversee it, and then have whatever people remember just follow from the logical framework. So, and what I feel that a lot of people that are good at remembering do, or that try to explain things about, how the world works, how psychology works, how business works, how you can be happy. These are just disconnected points, right? The 7 habits, the blah, blah, blah. They're all just random lists. And some of them, like the 7 habits of highly successful people, have a great list, and they can spin a very cool narrative around it. But to me, I always look for an underlying framework from which the 7 habits originate. So if I understand the framework, I myself can come up with the habits, so to say. I always feel that a very good example in this area is how people have dealt with Scrum, right? I've worked at a development company for many years, and I've worked with a lot of teams, and I've tried to teach them how to be optimal in serving clients. And part of the process that we implemented came from Scrum or Agile, the Agile perspective. And it's always the same, right? People that maybe know about Scrum, they come up with the result of the Agile perspective that is made into a framework such as Scrum, and start religiously following the rules of Scrum, right? They become rigidly agile. So they say every day we need to have a stand-up at the start of the day that should last no longer than 50 minutes, as the Scrum Guide dictates. Whereas I approach it from trying to figure out, why does the agile perspective exist? What is the reason for it to be there? And if it's there, what is it trying to achieve? What is it aiming at? What is it, right? Every framework is a model, and every model has what I call a prize and a prize. A prize with a Z and a prize with a C. Is that how you say the letters? Right? So prize with a Z and prize with a C. Meaning you get something and you pay something. Every model, every transaction, everything in life has a prize and a prize. And the point is that the smart way to deal with this is to come up or to use a model that what it costs is worth less to you than what it gives you, right? A nice example is being a map of a territory, right? If you live in real life, you see all the details, you see all the nitty gritty, but you have no oversight. So if you have a map of the territory, you can see a lot more and you know where you are relative to other things. So there's a value there, and both have an upside and both have a downside. In this world, usually people just start debating about what's better, and they end up with this one-sided idea that, no, reality is better because it's true. No, the map is better because it gives you oversight. I think all of those things are informative, and you should just really think about the transaction to determine what is the best transaction for you in a specific situation. So when it comes to Agile and Scrum, if you understand why this model was created, which is because they say that software development is infinitely complex and never predictable. If that is your reality, and you know you cannot fix the underlying issues of complexity and uncertainty, then you build a framework that deals with that in the most optimal way. Now, people coming from the waterfall mindset don't understand that, and they look at this like, oh, they made a model that takes out the complexity and takes out the uncertainty instead of embracing it and making the most of it. And they have the wrong idea, saying what Scrum dictates is something we should follow religiously, instead of if we understand the perspective. And we start to think about, if this is reality, if software development is inherently complex and unpredictable, then what can we do to negate that? And then you come up with things such as saying, as a team, we should really start the day by connecting with each other and trying to figure out what we did yesterday that is important for other people in the team, and what we're going to do today, so that, maybe someone has something they're working on that has to do with this, or it's interesting for them to know about this. So we align as a team so we can then go off and work separately on the same thing, the project, the application. And then the whole stand-up makes sense. And of course, it makes sense that you don't make it too long, because you want to get back to working, and we shouldn't make it like into a meeting because we want to be agile. At the same time, this 15-minute limit, it's just whatever. It's just a principle of saying, make sure the stand-up is useful. The point being, if you understand the underlying perspective, then the actual events and rules of Scrum make a lot more sense, and you also know why they make sense, and you know how to be flexible with them or not, because you know what it's trying to achieve. And that is something that we should do a lot more. And in my movie that I made before this one, I talked about, if you have a company and you want to create, let's say, a process in that company, and in that process you have people with roles and responsibilities, and then you want to make a list of the activities and the responsibilities that belong to each role, you should really start with, okay, what is the company? What is the service? How do we want to deliver that service? What's our USP? And if you have all that, let's say, mental modeling behind it, then the whole thing from process to roles and responsibility flow from that, and it just makes sense. It's not some sort of disconnected list. However, people in companies, most of the time, when asked, can you write down the roles and responsibilities, will just write random roles with random responsibilities because they just think that's a good idea. And then when I come and help them, I come up with the whole thing from start to finish. And then people are like, well, that's so clear. It's so obvious. It's so easy. Thank you for clarifying this. And it's only because I'm just giving them the mental model behind my conclusions that hopefully show you the logical path to these conclusions instead of just showing them conclusions. And the thing that is bad in reality is that often there is no real mental model behind the conclusions to start with. People don't do that work. They just come up with lists. And the only model behind the list is the fact that it's on a list. There's a suggestion that it's a sort of coherence in the list when there usually isn't. So, to look at this thing, what I drew is the fact that you start with an idea, right? You have a brain, you are a brain, and this brain is constantly creating thoughts, and they are informed by what your body is experiencing, the things that it picks up, the signals, the vibrations. It has its own feelings that it's offering. So your brain is taking out in all these inputs, and as a result is creating thoughts. And these thoughts, that you see them pass by, and at some point you might think some idea is really interesting. So you say, hey, I have a good idea. And you start working on it. You start taking this idea and you say, oh, I got to work this out. I got to create this idea as something more than just a short-term thing that popped into my head. I'm going to create this vision. I'm going to create this future idea, this conceptual idea of what does this mean, right? Why is this not just an idea, but a good idea or a grand idea? So you focus on it and you start creating a vision in your mind of what it is, what it can do, why it's important, right? You start creating a context. You start taking on this perspective, which is you start looking through the lens of the idea at the world. This is your vision. Now, if you have the vision, you start building structure, right? Because your mind is always building structure. It's always trying to take the fluid, the movement, and trying to project it into a state, into a fixed thing. The mind needs to chop things up into bits, and it needs to build structure so it can look at it and say, I know this, right? So even though your mind is a processor before anything, it's also a structure builder. I mean, the brain itself builds its own structure exactly like it, right? There's these nodes and they fire electricity between them or something. I'm sure I'm not correct in this, but that's how I look at it. And then if there's like two nodes that communicate with each other, a little bridge gets formed, and the more they communicate, the stronger and the better the bridge between them. And so, but it's still fluid, because if you don't think that thought anymore, then the bridge will just disappear in a while. And so your brain is this network of structure, fluid structure, changing structure. And this is exactly what I think you should be trying to emulate in real life with all the things you create. And what I call structure and process is really a medium. And a medium is what takes theory to practice. It's what takes vision to action, what takes your desire into outcome. So the structure and the process is what facilitates you inputting things and then processing them and then outputting them into something. So this is what I drew here, is that you start with an idea, you turn it into a vision. Now, based on this vision, you can create a structure and a process which will be able to input, process, and output. And as a result, you come up with, if you are in this part, if you work here, then this should be your activities. This is what you are responsible. This is what you're doing. But this activity list is something that anyone could understand if they understood what the vision was and how the vision was translated into structure and process. And then, right, because if you have a vision, this is where we want to go and this is how we want to get there. And then you say, okay, in order to do that, we create these departments or these units, and we have those units be responsible for this, then it makes total sense what they're going to do. Right? If you say, we want to build a restaurant. We want to create a restaurant. I have a vision for a restaurant, and this restaurant will be a high quality star restaurant, and we will offer a very special menu with all these handmade creations that no one's ever seen. Then if you know this and you start determining, okay, well, how should the kitchen work and what kind of roles are there, then you have this perspective to constantly look through and to check, okay, well, so we should have like a menu that isn't too big, because we want to make sure that whatever we serve, it has a quality, which means we really want to focus on a couple of dishes and become really good at recreating those dishes and be consistent so that we can reach the high predictable quality that we are trying to offer. And because they all have to be creations that we made up, we can't just put like standard recipes in there, all right? So it starts to make sense what the menu will be and what kind of cooks you want to look for, and right. So if in the end someone walks into the restaurant without knowing that, they might say, "Oh wow, it's so awesome! Why did they did this? Did they do this?" But if they learn the ideas behind the vision, then they can see, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's very consistent." So this is how it works. Again, the world focuses mainly on this part. They just look at activities, at outcomes, and they try to understand the world, and they try to remember the world only through this. But it's really useful to get this, and it's even more useful to get this. And the idea, it could be interesting to know where it originated from. But I think the main parts are these three. This is the what, the why, and the how to me. Right? This is fluid, this is fixed, this is flow. Right? I wrote some words below it to kind of let you see how I think about this. So to me, the vision is fluid. Right? A vision is a vague, generalized, faraway idea about how the world could be. It's a feeling. It's an emotion. It's like, yeah, I see something. And if you are good at talking about the vision, you can inspire people to kind of say, I know what he means. I can feel what he's looking at. But to go from vision, from theory to structure and then activities, that requires work. And it requires you to have reality meet the fantasy. And you will know that in your fantasy, things are easy because they are vague. And in reality, things are very concrete and non-negotiable. And so you create a fixed process so that the things can flow through it. So you start with fluid for the vision, then you create the fixed structure and process, and then you hopefully end up flowing through it because it makes sense, because it's one informed by a vision. And that. To me, this is strategical, this is tactical, and this is operational. Meaning strategic means, to me, always the vision, the goals, the essential steps. It's the highest level. It's vague, but there are some concrete things in there that are always true, they are essential, right? Whatever is mentioned in the vision is essential to the vision. Tactical just is about means. It's like, okay, if we have the vision, how do we think we can enable that vision? How can we reach the goal? How can we take the essential steps, right? What do we need to do in order to reach where we want to go? Well, we need to have some means, some concrete fixed things that will help us get there. They are replaceable, but they are not, how do I say this? They should be consistent while they are there. They should facilitate between theory and practice. And then the last is, of course, the operational. So the first is goal and essential steps. The structure and the process is the means to reach the goal and to take the essential steps. And the actions is the actual doing of the things. And if you are only aware of the doing of the things, then you may not know what the goal is or what you're really trying to achieve or what structure was put in place to facilitate that. You could also say that this is the insight, right? The vision is the insight in your brain that says this is where we want to go. And this insight is, again, an impression that is made within your brain, and it leaves residue. And that residue creates the structure, the working mental model. To me, this is the what, the why, and the how, right? The old what, why, how chain. I always come back to this trinity of what, why, how. The what is the vision. What do we want to achieve? The why, although it's kind of tricky in this, but the why to me means how do we process? Why do we process, right? It's a justification born from the what. Because this is what we want to do, this is what we will build to come to the how. So this is the why. Why do we do things? Because this is what we want to reach, and this is how we do them. To me, this is input, process, output. This will lead to outcome. I made a video, which maybe I can look up a while ago, where I said a lot of people in companies that manage companies really look at outcomes and outputs, but it's their job to be strategic and to give the inputs for the company, which is, what is the strategy? What are we trying to achieve? How will we achieve it? And not so much the tactical, which is the how does every department go to work? And certainly not what has been done and how much money did we make, because that's just an outcome. If you want to change the outcome, you need to change the inputs. So this is a very chaotic, thought-bleeding kind of thing where I wanted to look and show you how I look at things, how I think about things. And it has a lot to do with me being certain that the brain is made for processing way more than it's been made for remembering. And it is informed by the realization that people often focus on the outcome of thinking and not so much on the process of thinking. And the only value that there is in the process for your own thinking, but also to remember what people come up with as activities or roles or whatever. It would be way better if they explain their model and their process behind it, so you can derive their conclusions yourself instead of just needing to remember their disconnected list of points. It's informed by the fact that I believe the brain works way more at synthesizing knowledge and insights into a living structure of reality that is constantly changing and constantly being tested and constantly being invalidated or validated. And I think our school system teaches you the wrong way to look at the world, which creates people that really are very simplistic and not good at thinking for themselves. They can only remember other people's outcomes. And what you should really focus on is realizing that this process is at work and that it's your job as a aware being to consciously create your mental models along the, let's say, models and work that your brain is doing subconsciously. And so, as an awareness, the point is to be meta-aware, to be aware of your awareness and to look at how it works and to try and play with that. And that is something that I thought is interesting to take a look at. And I hope you thought it was interesting as well, and that perhaps it was informative, inspirational, or entertaining for you to go through this and not just a waste of your time. Let me know what you think, and I will thought bleed all over you in the future again. Thanks a lot.